everybody, welcome to Freezer Gourmet. This is my first video presentation or demonstration rather, and in honor of that I've chosen my favorite crunchy cornmeal pizzette. So in order to do this, you probably have most of everything that's needed, but I just wanted to show you, you'll need a rolling pin, preferably a marble one that you can keep in the freezer. You want to keep everything super, super cold for this. This you'll definitely need. It's a pastry scraper. I would say out of everything, this is the thing that I rely on most for this dough, which is really difficult to work with. Lots of flour, parchment paper, and a pizza pan. So also, if you have a cutting board or that's marble and you can keep it in your freezer, that would be super helpful. But I'm just using this total ice bag on my marble because obviously this doesn't fit in the freezer. So if you can ice your working space, that would also be awesome. Everything needs to be super duper cold. All right, all of my ingredients are in the freezer right now, waiting to use. So I'm gonna go get those now. Follow me. Okay, everyone, so I have my cornmeal, my salt, my flour in this container. I have my butter, which has been chopped up, sitting, waiting for me to prepare this. I probably did the prep for this about, I don't know, a week ago when I thought I would be able to do it, and I got sick, so it's still sitting in the freezer waiting for me. And then the wet ingredients I prepared this morning. They were in the refrigerator. I just stuck them in the freezer to get them nice and cold in order to make this dough. Actually, I'm going to leave this back in the freezer until we're ready for it. Okay, so I took the recipe that I've posted online and I multiplied it by 4. But typically when I do this, I'll do it times 10. That way I have dough in my freezer for a good 6 months time. I use this recipe all of the time for barbecues, and you could do a pasta dinner and serve this as one of the courses. It just keeps super well in the freezer, and it's one of the most delicious things I've ever tasted. So anyways, these are my dry ingredients, and I'm going to put my butter cubes inside. Really doesn't matter if it all fits in. You can do it in batches and you don't have to divide it up evenly. Just get as much in there as you can. When I do it times 10, I have to do this a few times over. So the object of keeping it cold is that you really don't want the butter to integrate into the dough. That's what keeps it really crispy and crunchy. So you want to blend this in your Cuisinart and get the butter about the size of a pea or a little bit bigger. I mean, they're not all going to be exactly the same size. And I would just pulse it. Okay, that's not doing it. I'm going to get on a little longer. And every once in a while, just open it up and go through it and check. See how big the butter pieces are. You want to do that a few times until it's ready. Lock it into place. Try again. It's really hard to see when the machine is running how big the butter is, but it's coming down in size. I actually can fit some more in at this point. I'm going to do it all at once so I don't have to take it out of the container. One thing, I always forget to add the salt. Don't forget the salt because it's really good. I add it afterwards. I'll salt the cheese, but try to remember the salt. For some reason, it always escapes me. Okay, looks like the butter is pretty much the size that we're looking for. The size of a pea. Whoops. There we go. About that big. You could even, a little bigger would be fine as well. This is a bit bigger. I'm going to leave that in there. And I'm going to take this out and take it over to my workspace. I would recommend getting your pan ready before you prepare your dough. So, this thing will fly away when you try to put your dough on it. In order to keep it in place, I kind of use the butter as a type of glue. And I'll basically just crease it and take some kitchen shears. And, right, in order to prepare the dough, As you see, I'm icing my counter. I do it without icing, but it really just makes it a little bit easier. What you're going to do is you are going to dump all of your ingredients out. If you multiply this recipe by 10, you could do this all at once. I will do 10 at a time by putting it all on the kitchen counter. And this is my liquid, which has just come out of the freezer. It's super duper cold. And I'm going to use a measuring cup to place the liquid in the center of my sort of like mound. But if you look, there's a big space here. I'm going to pour this inside, and there's little chunks of ice in here, which you really won't want in there, but it wouldn't hurt it. That just formed by having it in the freezer. And then very gently, you're going to push your dry ingredients into the center. And this is where my pastry scraper comes into hand. You do not want to overwork the dough. As you see, all the liquids can come out to the side. That's perfectly fine. Just scoop it up and put it back in. And as you see, I'm using my hands like very, very little. And I'll do the same thing over and over. I'll make a big moat in the middle of my mound. I'll take my liquid, put it inside. Not too much at a time. You're going to repeat this process over and over until you notice that clumps start to stick and form. So incorporating it in again. As you see, it's sort of sticking to my scraper. I can just scrape that off with a utensil or my finger. And more liquid. The great thing about this recipe is due to the butter in it. It holds really, really well. I mean, I've used this dough that has been sitting in my freezer, 6 months, 9 months. I take it with me on airplanes, so if I leave a house and I have leftovers, I always have my freezer bag traveling alongside of me. Of course, I have to check it in, but it's always frozen when I get it home, so it holds very well. If you do make this recipe and you take it out of the freezer and you wrap it, let's say in a saran wrap or in a tin foil, make sure that you dust it with flour before you roll it out, because there will be a lot of condensation. It'll be sticky and tacky, and it won't hold as well. And you notice that I'm starting to get these clumps that are forming. So wherever these balls of dough start sticking together, I don't want to press them, I don't want to knead them, I just want to put them off to the side and continue with the liquid. So it's becoming a little different in texture, a little lumpy. And the reason why you do this a little bit at a time is you really don't know how much liquid it's going to require. And if you find ever that you're running out of liquid, just add a little ice water to it. You don't have to squeeze the lemon again. You could put a little more sour cream in, but the proportions aren't that exact for the success of the recipe. Again, another clump of dough, take it out of there. I can take this out. And these are all going to be made into individual pizza balls. I'd say this is not the most difficult part. What maybe gets tricky is working with the dough, rolling it out and not letting it disintegrate as you pick it up and lift it onto the pan. And for that reason, when you're done with the dough, you do want to put it in the freezer or the refrigerator. If you're going to use it later in the day, put it in the refrigerator and get it super cold. If you have it in the freezer, it takes a while to defrost, so keep that in mind. Now, I made a lot of excess liquid because I always run out for some reason, and I didn't want that to happen today, so I'm going to have a bit left over. But it's better to have extra than to run out of it in the middle of your baking or preparing. All right. This is all ice cold though. I mean, my hands are freezing when I put them into the mixture. And if your marble slab is cold, you know, you're in business. I'm giving it a little bit of pressure just to encourage it to bond. And look what I've got. This is about what you would need for one pizza right there. You know, depending on how big you want it to be, but I'd say that this would make one pizza. I'm gonna leave it alone. You know, ice clumps have formed in my liquid because it was in the freezer longer than I had planned. But, you know, if you do find some ice gets into the mixture, take it out. You don't want to work it in like that into your mixture. And at the end, just be careful, be conservative with how much liquid you use, because like I said, you don't want to make it too wet. Just enough to keep it together. There's another pizza waiting to happen. And you know, I'll use the rest of this. I don't like to waste anything if I can avoid it. Just sprinkle a little bit of liquid there. Flip it over a few times. And I should be able to add it to this batch. As you see, it's really, really sticky. So I am going to wash my hands and then form these into individual pizza balls. Dust if you want the ball with a little flour before you wrap it, so that it's not as sticky and the saran wrap comes off of it better. It's not going to hurt the dough to use the flour on the outside. Okay, so I'm going to put one of these in the refrigerator, get it nice and cold. Actually, you know, I'm going to put it in the freezer so it gets cold quicker, because I want to get one done tonight before my son comes home from school. So I'm just going to explain or show you, demonstrate to you why this is one of my favorite pieces of equipment in the kitchen. It's great for cleanup. Look at that. You just scrape the counter off. And I use this also to lift my dough up and to get flour under it so it doesn't stick. You get as much of this off with this device as you can, and then you can use hot kitchen water and soap to clean your counter. Firstly, it takes about an hour to do the crust, and it's the same whether you do 1 or you do 10. So since it keeps so well in the freezer, you might as well do it times 10 if you like it, if you enjoy it, if you give it away as a present. Even if I'm doing 2 or 3 for a party, you're going to need to hand grate a lot of fontina cheese. I mean, of course, you can substitute whatever kind of cheese you like. I am using a mixture of fontina and mozzarella, which I pulled out of my freezer because I had this left over. And I have some fontina here as well. Okay, so for the pizza, we're going to have the cheese mixed in with the basil. And we're also going to have very thinly sliced tomatoes on top. There are so many ways to try this dish, but the classic is purely cheese, basil, and thinly sliced tomatoes. The idea is to slice them very, very thin. I mean, if you have a nice sharp knife, it shouldn't be a problem. And then you put them on top of paper towels and keep layering tomato, paper towel, tomato, paper towel. You want to get as much of the moisture out of them as possible. So I'll just, if I'm making a few of the pizzas for a large party, I will prepare my tomatoes ahead of time, maybe even the day before, and leave them in the refrigerator in the paper towels ready for me to use. I most likely already have my cheese grated, and I'll roll out my dough day of the party, and then just assemble. And it's fast and easy and very filling. So warn your guests, if you have a nice meal to follow, only to have 3 pieces maximum. It's very filling. And a little addictive, so it's kind of hard to stop once you've started. Especially if you're hungry when you arrive to a party. This has happened to me many times. I've had a nice dinner with a few courses. Everybody fills up on the pizza and nobody eats dinner. But I will go to the basil. So, however you want to do your basil, I usually will group it. This basil I bought it today. It doesn't look great because we washed it and we put it in a spinner. I would suggest keeping your basil in water outside of the refrigerator if you can, if you don't have bugs, and just let it sit on your kitchen counter until you're able to use it. But in this case, since it's going in a pizza, it doesn't have to be beautiful, although I'd love it to be. And just roll it up and thinly julienne it. Okay, so goes in, toss it. I would put some more basil in. I like a lot of basil. The only thing is, remember, after you put the basil in, you may not want to refreeze the cheese if you have leftovers, although I have, and it's not a terrible thing to do. I just think it's probably better to have fresh basil added at the last moment for maximum taste. Okay, that looks about good. Let me go get my dough out of the freezer. Okay, so this has been in there a little bit in the freezer, not more than 20 minutes. It's cold. I'm going to try to keep it that way and roll this out as soon as I can. Again, if you have a marble rolling pin and you can keep it in the freezer, much better. I would dust your work surface and dust the dough as well. Lightly dust it. It's sticky, it's tacky. If I put it down now, it's gonna stick to my work surface. This is the biggest difficulty with this dough, is keeping it from sticking and falling apart. So I always dust the bottom and I dust the top. And every time I roll my pin over it, I will add more flour. You'd think that that would ruin the dough. It really doesn't. But like, again, I dust my rolling pin 2 times, and look, it's already sticking. So dust it again and dust the top of this. Parts of it are still wet. Lift it up, flip it over, dust underneath. I have been using this for about 17 years, and I have to say that it took me a while to figure out how to work with this dough and not have it fall apart. As you can see the chunks of butter inside the dough, and that you want to keep them. You don't want to incorporate them, and that's why you're not using your hands, and that's why you're not kneading this out, but you are just rolling it out very gently. You want to try to keep it in the shape of a pie and a circle, but it's a little irregular. That's fine. Actually, it's what makes it unique and looking kind of interesting. Again, each time I roll it, I have to put more flour under it because the butter becomes exposed and it starts to not hold anymore. So more flour is required. Now, if you find that it's not cold enough, you can pick this up at any point in time, plop it on your pan, stick your pan back in your freezer, get it colder, and then take it back out and work it with it. So that's something I might do at this point, just to show you. So I'm folding it in half. I'm picking it up. I mean, literally, if I don't have support, it will fall apart. I put it on the pan, and I'm gonna put this back in the freezer for a few more minutes. See, sometimes this can kind of come apart, and it gets a little crackly, and if that happens, just feel free to press it together. If you need to use a little liquid, I think merely just pressing it together will get it to adhere. Again, just always, always, always dust the countertop, especially if you haven't got a cold surface to work on. So in terms of the thickness of this crust, okay, this just broke apart here, okay? This happens, don't worry about it. Just, that means it's gotten kind of tacky here. That means I need to add flour, and I need to go under here and add flour. It's broken here. I'm gonna press it back together. I'm gonna press it, and the thing is, you can use this pizza and put it on the pan. If it's got a little bit of a hole in it, fix it there. I want to get this thin enough to just basically, this is the thickness I want the whole crust to be. So the thicker parts are on the edges. I have to roll those out some more, and I'm ready to use it. Again, it's sticking to my roller, but now, if you find that you have more on one side and not enough here, just put it together like a puzzle. Cut it off. Put it where you need it. It will never roll out in a perfect circle. This dough does not work that way. Now, in order to lift it, I have to fold it over in half. The weight of the dough will actually break itself apart. So I'm going to dust it first so it doesn't stick to itself. Fold it over again, and then I'm going to lift it up and put my pan as close as possible so it doesn't have to be held in the air for too long. Put it back, and here we go. We've got a piece that's kind of come loose. It's really just what the dough does, but trust me, it's worth the effort. I'm gonna have to piece this. I'm really happy that this has happened. Usually I have the pizza in the freezer much longer than I did today. I have a guest over that I want to introduce this pizza to, so I kind of rushed the process. So now I'm sort of putting this back together, and it's not a big deal, and I'm happy it's happened, so you can see that if this happens at home, you know, it's gonna taste amazing. You just put it back together. Okay, and patch up the holes, and there we go. Now we're ready to add, basically you're going to add your cheese in a circle and leave it about 1 inch to 1.5 inches away from the border of your pizza. This little piece sticking out here is kind of bothering me, and I could use it in this area, so that's what I'm going to do. And why not? I'll just stick this guy in here. Okay, now I've got my pizza circle pretty much, and I'm ready to add my cheese. Okay, so spreading this around, you really, you know, it's a matter of taste how much you want, but the idea is you don't want so much cheese on it that when you serve it, it just falls off the crust. So I usually put, it's hard to measure, but if you can see, I just basically cover it and have a little bit of extra on top. It's going to melt and flatten out. And then the next piece is putting the tomatoes in a circle. So I'm going to grab my tomatoes. Sometimes I don't have perfect circles left over, but I'll take what I have to start with. And if I need to use some pieces to piece them in, I'll do that. It basically, it doesn't taste like, since this is so thin and they dry out in the oven, it doesn't depart a huge tomato flavor, but it really looks pretty. The green and the white and the red, different colors. This one's a little on the thick side, but if it's all that's left, I'll use it. And I guess this is the perfect space for this piece. Okay, and then the next thing you do is fold it over. You might find the dough is sticking to your fingers when you're doing this, and if that's happening, just take a little flour and just press it down, and then it won't stick anymore, and you can patch things together as well as you go along. This, I would try to make this edge stick together so that the cheese doesn't come out through the sides, and press all of that down so that you really want a solid crust going around, or you're going to lose some of your cheese and juices or whatever. Again, it's tacky, so I need a little flour. And none of this flour that you're using to make this easier on yourself is going to change the taste or texture of this crust. So you wouldn't want to go overboard with it, but use it as it's needed. Okay, so this is what the pizzette is going to look like when you're done, or something like this. And it's ready to go in the oven. Okay, so the galette is done. Basically a golden brown, light brown, and it lifts off nicely from the parchment paper. When I cut this, I don't cut it in the shape of a pizza. I like to serve it in small pieces because it's kind of heavy. I mean, not heavy, but you don't want to encourage people to take large amounts at one time. And the best part of this is the crust. So I save those for myself. So basically, that's how it's served. And enjoy. Good eating.